All right, so I don't know how the voice quality is going to be on this one. Apologies, I am recording on my phone, so hopefully the quality is all right. But today I wanted to talk about fear. So I was debating whether or not to talk about this topic on a, podcast labeled Peace, Joy, and Love, but I think in the end, you can't avoid talking about it if you want to, because although we want to inspire peace, joy, and love, there is a road towards there, right? And I think you can't get away or avoid fear on the path towards that. And I have a pretty personal story I want to talk about through this. So I have been well acquainted with fear ever since I was a child. I assume most of y'all have been, but I've had a very weird obsession with fear when I was little. So I think this probably started around when I was 11, 12 years old and just thinking about death as a concept. When I started to really try to think about death as a concept. And when I really questioned, okay, Mom, does, heaven really exist? Where do we really go after death? Because during that time, I'm already skeptical about all the Christianism things. There's no evidence we're going to heaven after we die, right? But I think she paused for a moment and then just said we go to heaven, become angels. But ever since then, I was very confused and I did not believe that answer. Just instinctively did not believe it. So I kept thinking about it. At first, it was an innocent enough, intellectual thinking about. And then the more I thought about it, the more scary it became. The imagination of, obviously I wasn't really religious at the time, of being totally annihilated and no longer existing absolutely terrified me. And I think there was this one instance that really solidified, my obsession with death and with fear. And that was I believe the Chinese New Year's when I was going to my grandma's house, my grandma and grandpa's house. And, we were watching, there's a television show that's kind of like the ball drop in New Year's Eve in China, but it's for Chinese New Year. And we were watching that. Everybody was laughing. We had dumplings, had a lot of food. But I saw that and I saw this and be like, this is one less Chinese New Year in my life. I just became so aware of time and the fleetingness of life in that moment that I think I had a sort of, you could say, mini panic attack about it. And I could not bear to see the happy moment anymore. And I needed to go back into my room and just hide, honestly, underneath a blanket or something. And ever since then, I've had these weird mini periods where I would scare myself to death thinking about death, And if you are a person who gets kind of triggered by death or, are on the older side of things, or you start to think about this more seriously, I think from a young age, I don't know why, but I started thinking about it very often. And it was usually in periods of time where I didn't have much to do. There was no school. It was usually during the summer. So I have this association with summer. Usually it's supposed to be for fun, for vacation. But for me, it's just associated with this obsessive thinking pattern of death that I am deathly afraid of. So thinking about death leads to nowhere but fear for me. And I get locked into this fearful state where I cannot move, but I cannot search for help either. It's just me being torn apart into two different directions and not being able to say anything about it because I was convinced at the time that nobody could save me from it. Because, who can save you from death? It is an inevitable finality of your life that is going to happen no matter what you do. And it doesn't really matter who says what or something. And I've asked my mom once, I don't know why, but this was in my mind. I've asked my mom once, and her answer did not convince me. And I wasn't convinced that anyone else is going to convince me that there is anywhere else but just total annihilation of you returning to dust. And that just, the concept of non existence was something I hated thinking about, but I could not help but constantly think about. When I think back on it, it's probably kind of a obsessive compulsion disorder that I sort of developed around it. But the thing is, I started having very intense periods of like fear of death. It was to the point where some points where I'm like, I might as well just die now so I can stop feeling all this fear of death, and that would be easier for me. And yeah, I've ever since so 12 years old, every single year, like clockwork almost, it would come up in random periods, and it would just severely disrupt whatever great experience I was having at the time. Like my family would go to travel a lot during when I was a child. We've gone to Singapore, we've gone to Australia, New Zealand, like a lot of these places. But when I was there looking out, and like most of the times it's all right? It's okay, and I'm looking out and I'm having a good time. But randomly at night, when we're about to fall asleep, I just have these gruesome, and not like gruesome, it's just dreadful thoughts of death. And it completely takes me out of it. And usually it's at nighttime, but sometimes during daytime as well. It just randomly comes up, and I have to force myself to smile along because my family are enjoying themselves, and I can't really let that show, or that's what I thought at the time at least. It wasn't like by any means a joyful period, and really tainted, I feel like, a lot of experiences in my childhood that would have been more happy and, just pure joy in that sense. It really tainted a lot of that. And I talk about it like it's not a big deal right now because I finally got out of it. But it didn't take until I think is after college graduation that I really settled into not having those thoughts anymore, or really believing there's an alternative to that, I guess. But before 2020, ironically, because a lot of people, had a bad year 2020, but during 2020 was the first year where I was like free of that obsessive thinking about death and the fear that would come with it. So ever since I was 12, I would live in the fear of death. And, there's no more fear that is more intense than that kind of fear. So you could say fear is a very old friend of mine at this point. And I would get afraid thinking about fear because, the convolutionness of it. And I would be afraid that this cycle would come up at any single point because it's uncontrollable in a sense that I start thinking about these things, and then, the cycle begins. And yeah, it's just, it's not a good time. You could say that. Anyways, why did I want to bring this up in a Peace, Joy, and Love podcast? I think it's because of that experience of me that I started thinking about this stuff in a very young or younger age, I feel like, than a lot of other people. And I start thinking about, like, afterwards, after I started, getting into some stuff where I feel like there might be an alternative, or things that helped me jump out of that state of mind. And right now, until now, okay, let's cut a little bit out of that. But I guess why am I talking about this? Because I feel like this year, in the beginning, I feel like I almost went back to that state again. But it was a lot worse because this time I couldn't control a lot of the symptoms that happened for a panic attack, I really felt like I was going to faint a couple times, and I was very uneasy and unsteady, and it would happen when I was just walking towards school, and I'd have to lean on a wall in order to keep my balance upright and keep myself upright from not fainting. That was the extent of it, but I was still going to school. And I didn't want it to show, but there were periods of time where it was kind of uncontrollable like that. And it really reminded me of all the periods of time that I went through ever since I was 12 and a little child. It was an interesting experience because I thought I was out of it. I thought I did not have to look back on it, but another event, I've talked about this in my last episode, the relative that had an illness just triggered all this fear and all the cycles really straight back into me. And this time it was not ignorable. It was not like suppressible in a way that I could still fake it in a sense. I can no longer fake it. I was done. Like, there cannot be anything worse than this. And I think in the moment of me having a panic attack episode, and I usually go to the bathroom when I have those. I don't know why, but it's weird, but what works. And I was listening to an audio, I believe, during that. And I remember just feeling so helpless and so painful. I really wanted everything to stop. And in that moment, I think, and I also, had another thought, and that was, I don't want to live like this anymore. And it wasn't in a sense of like giving up on life, but an ultimate decision of being like, I am not going to, or if I can in any way, shape, or form possible, I'm not going to get into this cycle ever again. And you could say, kind of decided in that moment that, first of all, I ultimately surrendered to it. Okay, fine, take me, in a sort of sense, because I really thought I was going to die in that moment. And the other sense of being, I'll get myself out of this. It was that instantaneous, like, kind of knowing, but it would come out and then not come out, and then in the sort of sense. But I do remember in that day making the decision of being different. I wanted to be different. I did not want this to happen again. And afterwards, it was a long period of, therapy. I've talked about this. I will skip over that. But it really reminded me of why I wanted to talk about this in here, because I, at that moment, only I did not want to live in fear. That was the choice I think I kind of made at the point in time. I'm going to do whatever I can to not live in fear. But I did not think about the opposite, or like the more of that. And then it was not after, getting into, you could say, spirituality and meditation, and I got that through because of therapy and psychology, and these stuff kind of bleed over in a sense. And once I get deeper and deeper, because I did not feel satisfied even after I was sort of grasping my symptoms way better than before. I was able to sleep at night, and my daily anxiety was a lot better. But still, like, I wanted something to look forward to in a sense, because just going to like status quo was not going to do it for me. Not anymore, I think. And then I went on the deeper journey, and it wasn't until I feel like the very end of last year that I really made the decision to not live my life based on fear, but I do want to live my life based in love. And, that's why I started the whole Peace, Joy, and Love podcast thing, as I mentioned in the intro. So ultimately, what I want to say here is, it was a decision for me, and it was a really hard decision for me to be like, I want to live in love, and I do not want to live in fear, or I do not want to live in a fear-based life. And I think it's easier said than done to make this decision, because unconsciously, there are so many things. I can get into so many reasons, biologically, psychologically, spiritually, of why we choose unconsciously to live in fear. But that is the reality of what most people are doing right now, right? I mean, I don't know about you. Hopefully you have, or you haven't had like a dreadful journey, but you've made that decision. But have you really made that decision? Is what I want to ask, because I thought I made that decision like a long time ago, but I actually truly didn't. I was still thinking the same patterns. I was still doing the same things. And there's no better way to put this, but I was still living very unconsciously about what I was doing to myself. And part of this was due to lack of knowledge, of course, and part of this was just due to... Actually, no, it was just lack of knowledge. I did not know there was any other way to live but that way. And it wasn't until I got into this that I realized there is another way. And to believe there is another way, because to know and to believe are two very different things, right? And I wanted to use this podcast to tell you my journey of that realization, to hopefully let you know that there is another way to live. Even if you don't believe it right now, at least you know it right now, is my hope out of this. So what do I mean by that? Because if you think about life, a lot of things are surrounded. There's going to be things that bring you stress, that bring you sadness, that bring you a lot of negative emotions. You have no choice in that, right? That is just life. And I'm telling you, there is a choice. And I did not realize that there was a choice until quite recently. Or actually, probably I kind of knew during the time when I started making this podcast. Because you can choose to live in peace, joy, and love, and choose not to react in a way that would bring more stress or sadness or all those negative emotions to you. And you can choose to believe that your innate essence, whatever you like to call that, is peace, joy, and love. And it is not the pain, the hurt, the stress, the anxiety, the pressure of normal being. And that sounds insane, I feel like, to the normal human world right now, where it's dominated by, survival, honestly. And because it's you could argue it in so many different aspects. You don't even need to tell me, I already know all of them. But what I want to say is, what do you want to choose to believe in, and how do you want to choose to live your life? Let's say, you're right, and, life is just pain, and everything is meaningless, and stuff like that. Does that make you feel any better about how you live your life? It did not make me feel better. But somehow, some ways, it's so much more important to live life being right than live life good. And there's a difference in that. And what makes you think what you think is right as well? I guess these are all questions that have to be thought about a little bit more in order to, dig more deeply. But what I realized is my life is consisted of how I decide to live it. And I think this is a hard concept to grasp, so let me give some examples, actually. So what do I mean by, what do you mean you can choose peace, joy, and love every single day? I have this, and this situation. Let's be more concrete than that. Let's say, you're broke, you're homeless, living on the street. If you're listening to this podcast, I very much doubt that, but let's just say you are. And there's nothing well going on in your life. Your family abandoned you, you're stinking, you're starving, and then there's no hope for you in life. And I completely get that. It's in that situation, you barely have the mental consciousness or the mental capacity to think about anything but survival in that moment. But think about it. In that moment of time, of course your situation is horrible, but if you don't think about all that, if you just focus on right now, where you're, maybe your tummy's starving, maybe you feel lightheaded, and there's a lot of things that you want to change and it just feels bad physically. Maybe you have a physical illness. I don't know. But what I realized through, lots of books is how much are you resisting that? And some people might look at me like I'm crazy right now. I'm like, what do you mean resisting that? Of course I am. I don't want to be this way. And that's precisely it. What I feel like a lot of people don't realize is pain is not created by the circumstances or situations in your life. It's created by your resistance to it. And I think this is a very hard concept to grasp if you have not experienced non-resistance. But there are times in your life, if you can try this with something that's more smaller, of course. This is a very extreme example if you're homeless and stuff. And it's going to be very hard for you. I'm not lying. It is. The instinct to survive overwhelms you so much, you cannot be conscious in that way in order to choose to not resist. It's very hard to do so. I'm not lying. But you made it hard to do so, in a sense. Okay, anyways, let's go back to our experiment. Okay, just think of a little thing. Something like from a scale to 1 to 10 brings you no more than level 1 level of emotional disturbance. Like, I don't know, your husband misplaced a toilet seat, or, someone did not clean up after themselves. Your roommate forgot to wash the dishes, something like that, something low triggering. When you think of that and think that person, of course, there's going to be annoyance. Or the moment you look at those dishes and you're like, ugh, he didn't do it again. That's resistance. You can think about it. So imagine a world, just imagine, all right, we don't need to be too over the top here, but just imagine with me that you just look at the dishes as the dishes. Because that's what, right? You're like, what are you talking about? Because that person put the dishes here, of course. But you're thinking now, right? You're reasoning about all those stuff. But if you just think about it, these are just dishes that are dirty, that are in front of you. Of course, you can do something about it, but you might think about, you need to tell your roommate that they're not doing the dishes again, and you feel kind of anxious about the whole situation. You see, a lot of our suffering is brought about by this thinking, but in essence, when you see dirty dishes, it's not doing anything to you. It is, it's a shitty situation, of course, but it's not something you need to be angry about if you don't attach meaning to it. It is just dishes that are dirty, that are in the sink. You can go about your life. They might not be pleasant to look at, but it does not mean you need to fight the dishes. That's such a weird way to put it. But that's essentially what you're doing. You're fighting with the dishes in your mind, That's what I kind of mean by resistance. And I think you need a lot more concrete examples in order for me to actually demonstrate this, but that's something I'm going to come up with right now. But that's a small situation. I think I need to quote Eckhart Tolle from Power of Now. Most of the times, right now, it's perfectly fine. Like, I don't know where you are right now. Are you driving, washing dishes, just walking around, doing your workout, whatever, or just in your room by yourself? The enemy, or sort of the pain and hurt that is caused by these situations, is your ability to think of negative emotions in a sort of sense. So let's say you're, in front of a TV, just watching and listening to my voice for some reason, and you feel lonely. Why do you feel lonely? Because you're alone here and you do not have another person there. Although I understand that it could feel lonely, but in that moment, right there, you have a TV, you have your sofa, There's nothing around you that is going to hurt you physically or mentally. And if you just are able to focus just on my voice or just on one single object in that TV, it's in here right now. You are safe. And there's nothing that is really hurting you. The only thing that is really hurting you is your mind and your thinking and feeling sorry for yourself and all of the emotions that become associated with you and your situation that you think about. And that's hard. I'm not saying that that isn't hard, but I'm also saying that there is a choice to be made here. You can stop your own thoughts in the middle of that and be like, because there's always another interpretation of the situation. I mean, I can get into that infinitely, but I'm just going to be saying that you have a choice in that situation to either feel happy or unhappy. And you have chose to feel unhappy if you feel like, oh my God, I'm going to die alone. And, think about all those thoughts. And if you have had a habit to think those thoughts, it's very easy to continue thinking those thoughts because it's a habit. Like a lot of things in your life is going to be a habit. Why you think you can't change, why you think you're like this, blah, blah, blah. A lot of things like that. But these cycles are more likely than not all propelled by one common ancestor, and that is fear. Fear of something, fear of being alone, fear of something like that. But once I realized that a lot of my decisions, a lot of what I'm thinking, feeling, and a lot of my unhappiness and just feeling bad overall is because I am just, everything I do, everything I think is just based on fear. And if I am able to, live a love-based life, like how good would that be? Just imagine that for a second, that everything you see and do and feel are love-based, and there's this internal just love inside your heart, not eternal fear. So anyways, even if it's impossible, even if I have to strive for my whole life in order to achieve that state, I think it's a much better goal for me. And I just feel so much better for that to be the case than to recognize or to think that the other normal way is what it has to be. I just feel so much better about it. I don't know about y'all, but I do. And I can go into a little bit more about spirituality and all the other things that I've been learning, but I don't think I'm that informed about the topic yet. So I am just going to share my part of the story and hopefully inspires you a little bit. All right. So today's podcast is a little bit longer than usual, but hopefully you have enjoyed some of the things I've been saying, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace, joy, and love out. Okay, I thought I should record some experience I've had after choosing to live a love-based life, because I feel like we not only want to have, although it's very important to avoid bad things from happening, it is also very important for you to have good things to look forward to. So what could it be is the question that is proposed right now. What could it be for a love-based life instead of a fear-based life? And what does it look like? Maybe you just don't have an idea of what it looks like and what it could be because you've known your whole life that this is the only way. And honestly, not a lot of people have talked about the other way, or the other way just seems unrealistic, but that's another issue. I'm going to share my own experience of what a love-based life could look like based on what I've achieved kind of so far, you could say. So I've been doing meditations for around, let's say, July last year, consistently. From morning and nighttime, I will do one meditation. Like, I've not stopped meditating any single day. Maybe it's only a 30-minute meditation, but I have done meditation every single day. And ever since then, there has been, obviously, life is involving of ups and downs and stuff, but I have had one big realization that is more important than anything else, and that is the amount of security you get in yourself. You do not realize how I realized like a lot of my fear was based on that insecurity of not having that center and groundedness. And I never realized it until I felt what. So I guess I can describe this in metaphors. So it feels like you were falling off a cliff for infinity, so long, for you don't know how long, and you don't realize it because you're so used to it. And suddenly, it's not like you smash into the ground or anything, but suddenly you're on Earth. That's the only way I could describe how my being from internally has ultimately changed. And how else can I describe this? I think it's an innate feeling that you're going to be okay no matter what. Instead of, constantly thinking about a lot of things in order to survive here, there, and being so unsteady in life, it's suddenly like you were this particle that was just flying astray everywhere, and suddenly you have, an earth or a moon to circle around towards, and you're stabilized. It's something like that. And the amount of security and the amount of peace that it brings you is very incomparable to a lot of other things. And this is not to even mention some of the joyful and maybe you could kind of say manifestation and synchronicity moments that also come with it. But I almost think that's like a nice plus, but is not the core reason of why I pursued this. Is just the ultimate change in internal state. And people can sense it as well. Like, suddenly you are in a lot less conflicts and you are not intending to do so. And you just speak to people much more easily. Just imagine a day in your life just without stress, like at all. Like either it's speaking to people, you're working, whatever. There's just no single amount of thing that can get you riled up, or not even riled up. It's like you're a calm lake and you are that body of water with a little bit of waves on top occasionally, but it's nothing that will overwhelm you, nothing that can conquer you because you are the lake. And okay, this is getting more abstract as I talk about it, I realize. But it's really hard to describe if you haven't felt it. So I'm trying to give you as close as approximations that I can describe it as. But it is such a change to how your core living has changed. It's fundamentally different. It is something I wish everyone had a chance to experience, because we had so much less reason to conquer, to compete, to engage in any type of violence towards yourself or towards others, or disrespect or anything like that. You wouldn't even have the urge to, because there is no reason to. And yeah, so that's the best of my abilities I can describe this as. So hopefully this episode has been some help to you, and I will try to get myself together next time to describe it a bit better if I can, because I think it's useful for y'all to know about this, even if I can't explain it that well right now. But hopefully y'all have a good day, or great weekend, great week, wherever you are, whenever you are, however you are. Anyways, PJ&L out.